Emily Carter didn't knock. She pushed that gate open with both hands, her boots already bleeding through the leather, her dress soaked through from 3 miles of walking in Wyoming summer heat. She wasn't asking for charity. She wasn't asking for pity. She planted both feet in the dirt of William Dawson's ranch and said the only thing she had left to say, "I will work harder than any man you've ever hired." Nobody in this town had ever looked at her and seen anything worth keeping. She was about to find out if that was true. Chateg. If this story already has your heart beating faster, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow Emily all the way to the end. And drop a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The stagecoach didn't even stop all the way. It slowed just enough for the driver to lean back and say, "Far as we go, miss." And Emily Carter had no choice but to grab her one bag and step down into the dust of Harlow Creek, Wyoming, with the coach still rolling when her second boot hit the ground. She stood there a moment. Just stood there with the July heat pressing down on her like a physical weight, and the smell of horse and dry earth filling her lungs, and the sound of a town she'd never been to already going quiet around her. She knew what that quiet meant. She'd heard it before in Cheyenne and Laramie, in every stop along every road she'd traveled since her father's farm burned to the ground 4 months ago, and took everything with it, except the clothes on her back, and a name nobody in Wyoming wanted to hire. The quiet meant they were looking at her, and she already knew what they saw. Emily Carter was 25 years old. She had dark brown hair that fell past her shoulders in waves and green eyes that caught the light in a way that made people do a second look, but only for a second. Because the second look always landed somewhere else. On her arms, on her waist, on the way her dress pulled across her hips, on the sheer unapologetic size of her. She was not small. She had never been small. And in every town she'd walked into since she'd been old enough to walk into them alone, that fact had preceded her like a shadow arriving before the sun. "Lord Almighty," a woman said from the boardwalk. Not quiet. Not intended to be. A man by the general store laughed. Short and mean. Emily kept her eyes forward. She picked up her bag. She shifted the strap onto her shoulder. She started walking. That was the one thing Emily Carter had always been able to do. No matter what was said, no matter what was thrown, no matter how the world arranged itself against her, she could always put one foot in front of the other and keep moving. She had a destination. She'd found it 2 weeks ago, pressed inside a copy of the Wyoming Territorial Gazette someone had left on a bench in Laramie. A short advertisement, barely 3 lines. Ranch hand wanted. Dawson land 3 miles north of Harlow Creek. Hard work, fair pay, no nonsense. Ask for W. Dawson. 3 lines. That was all. No mention of experience preferred. No mention of men only. No mention of what W. Dawson expected a ranch hand to look like. Emily had read those 3 lines 4 times. Then she'd folded the paper and put it in her pocket and started walking north. The road out of Harlow Creek was unpaved and uneven, and the sun showed no mercy. By the time the Dawson ranch gate came into view, Emily's feet were screaming, and her dress was damp at the collar, and the back of her neck had started to burn. She stopped at the gate, looked at it. It was a solid gate iron hinges wood that had been replaced recently. The post sunk deep and straight. The land beyond it was well kept. Fences running clean lines. A barn that looked like it had been repaired within the year. A house that was plain but solid. Whoever W. Dawson was, he took care of what he owned. Emily pushed the gate open. She walked up the drive, and she heard him before she saw him, the rhythmic strike of a hammer against wood, steady and unhurried, the sound of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and didn't see any reason to rush it. He was working on the far side of the barn, tall, broad through the shoulders, a hat pulled low against the sun, the brim worn soft from years of use. He had on a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and his hands on the fence post were the hands of a man who worked every day of his life calloused and sure and brown from the sun. He didn't look up right away. Emily stopped 6 feet from him. She set her bag down. She squared her shoulders. "Mr. Dawson," she said. The hammer came down one more time. Then he straightened up, turned around. William Dawson was 38 years old. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, and a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same stone as this landscape, hard and clean, and not given to easy softening. His eyes were gray, not warm gray, the kind of gray that belonged to winter skies and cold rivers, and men who had learned a long time ago not to expect much. He looked at her, not the way the town had looked at her, not with amusement or contempt or that particular cruelty that passes itself off as honesty. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he doesn't yet understand and isn't willing to pretend he does. "You're at the wrong place," he said. His voice was low, not unkind, just certain. "I don't think I am," Emily said. "I saw your advertisement in the Laramie Gazette, ranch hand wanted. I'm here about the position." He was quiet for a moment. "That advertisement was for a ranch hand," he said. "Yes, sir, I'm aware." "You know what ranch work is?" "I grew up on a farm outside of Cheyenne," Emily said. "My father ran 140 head of cattle for 17 years. I know what ranch work is." His eyes didn't change. He looked at her for a moment longer, then looked past her toward the gate, then back to her face. "That farm still running?" he asked. "No, sir. It burned 4 months ago." Something passed across his face. Not pity. Something closer to recognition. Like a man who had heard a particular kind of bad news before and knew better than to say anything useless about it. "You got people here?" he asked. "Family. Someone in town?" "No, sir. I don't know anyone in Harlow Creek." "So you came to a stranger's ranch in a territory you don't know," he said, "to ask for work." "Yes, sir." "Why here?" Emily looked at him straight. "Because your advertisement didn't say I had to be anything in particular. It said hard work and fair pay. I can do hard work, and I need fair pay. That seemed like enough." He turned the hammer over in his hand once, looked down at the fence post, looked back at her. "I'll think on it," he said. "You can wait by the house." She didn't wait long. She had been sitting on the porch steps for maybe 10 minutes, her bag at her feet, when she heard horses coming up the drive. Not one horse, 4 or 5. She turned. The men who rode in were from town. She recognized 2 of them from the boardwalk. The one at the front was a big man in an expensive coat, the kind of coat that told you he wanted you to know he could afford it. He had silver in his hair, and a face that had settled into permanent satisfaction with itself. He was the sort of man who was used to things going the way he expected. He reined in at the edge of the yard and looked at Emily the way he might look at something he'd found on the bottom of his boot. "Dawson," he called out. William came around the side of the barn. He stopped when he saw the horses. His expression didn't change. "Collins," he said. So that was Henry Collins. Emily had heard the name in town. Someone had said it at the general store in passing. The man with the most land and the loudest opinion about everyone else's. Collins looked from William to Emily and back to William. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. "What is this?" he asked. "Woman came about the ranch hand position," William said. Collins laughed. The men behind him laughed. It started small and got mean fast, the way those laughs always do when they have an audience and a target. "William Dawson," Collins said, shaking his head. "I have always respected you, always said you were the straightest man in this county. But I cannot stand here and watch you embarrass yourself over—" He gestured at Emily. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The gesture said everything he wanted it to. Emily felt it land. She always felt it. People thought she had grown used to it. She hadn't. You didn't grow used to being treated like a punchline. You just got better at not letting it show. She looked at her hands. She breathed. "I haven't hired her," William said. His voice was flat. "Good," Collins said. "Because I'm telling you now as a friend, you bring that woman onto your payroll and this town will talk. They're already talking. She walked through Main Street 20 minutes ago and people are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" William asked. The kind that attach themselves to a man's reputation, Collins said. You're a respected man, Dawson. You want to keep that respect. You send her back where she came from. Emily stood up. She didn't mean to. Her body just decided before her mind caught up. She stood up, and she picked up her bag, and she turned to face William Dawson directly. I appreciate you hearing me out, Mr. Dawson, she said, and her voice was steady. She was proud of that. She was so proud of that because nothing inside her felt steady right now. I'll go. She took one step toward the gate. Miss Carter? She stopped. William was looking at her. The gray eyes were unreadable as always, but there was something in the set of his jaw, something that had changed in the last 30 seconds. A decision that had been made. I didn't say no, he said. Silence. Collins shifted in his saddle. Dawson, you're welcome to ride back to town, Henry, William said without looking at him. I didn't ask for your opinion on my payroll. Collins' face went red. You're making a mistake. I've made plenty, William said. This isn't one of them. He looked at Emily. The job pays $12 a month. You work dawn to dusk. You take your meals at the house. There's a room in the bunkhouse end of the row. It's empty and it's clean. You start tomorrow morning. Emily stared at him. She had prepared for no. She had braced herself for no. She had been told no in so many ways by so many people over so many years that she had started to believe no was the only language the world knew how to speak to her. Yes, sir, she said. Thank you. Collins wheeled his horse around without another word and rode out, his men following, and the dust they kicked up settled slow and thick in the afternoon air. William watched them go. Then he looked back at Emily. You got work boots? He asked. She looked down at her feet. The leather had rubbed through in 2 places. She could feel it. These are all I have, she said. He nodded once like he was noting it, filing it away. We'll figure it out, he said. Then he picked up his hammer and went back to the fence. That night, Emily lay on the bunk in the end room of the bunkhouse and stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence of a Wyoming night, which was not really silence at all, but a different language. Crickets and wind, and the soft movement of cattle somewhere in the dark, and the occasional creak of the house settling. She had not slept properly in 4 months. She had slept in barns and on benches, and in one memorably miserable night in the back of a freight wagon, while the temperature dropped below 40. She had gone days at a stretch eating whatever was cheapest, and working whatever hours were offered, before the employer looked at her properly and changed his mind. She had told herself every morning for 4 months that today would be different. Most mornings, she'd been wrong. She looked at the ceiling. The bunk was narrow, but the mattress was decent, and the blanket smelled like cedar and clean air. The room had a small window, and through it she could see a piece of the Wyoming sky, and the stars out here were different than they were in the city, bigger, brighter, closer, like they had opinions about things. You'll find more than wages here. She didn't know why that phrase drifted through her head. Nobody had said it. But something in the way William Dawson had told her she was starting tomorrow, something in the plain, no-ceremony fact of it, had made her feel it. Like maybe this wasn't just a job. She didn't let herself think too hard about that. Hope was a thing she'd learned to ration. She closed her eyes. She slept. Dawn came fast and ruthless in Wyoming. Emily was on her feet before the light had fully decided what it was going to do. She dressed, braided her hair, pulled on the ruined boots, and walked out into the pale gray of early morning. William was already in the barn. Of course he was. He handed her a pair of worn leather gloves, without a word pointed at the feed bins, and told her the morning routine in about 12 sentences, clean and efficient. Nothing wasted. Horses first, then cattle, then the east fence needed walking, because something had been testing it overnight, and he wanted to know where. Emily listened, nodded, went to work. The first hour nearly broke her, not because she didn't know what she was doing. She did. Her body remembered it. The farm was in her hands, and her back, and her sense of how much weight a bale carried. But she had not worked like this in 4 months, and her body had opinions about the resumption. She didn't say anything. She kept working. William moved around the barn with the economy of someone who had done the same tasks so many times they had become part of him. And Emily watched him without being obvious about it, cataloging the routine, fitting herself into the gaps and the rhythms of it. By mid-morning, they were working in parallel without speaking, and it was not uncomfortable. It was the particular kind of silence that develops between two people who are both paying attention to the work. At noon, William's housekeeper, a compact woman named Ruth, who looked like she had survived several difficult decades and had opinions about all of them, appeared at the barn door and told them dinner was ready. Emily had not expected to eat at the house. William had said it, but she had assumed he meant a plate left on the porch. He did not mean that. He meant a table, 2 chairs, hot food on actual plates with actual silverware, and Ruth sitting in the kitchen making pointed remarks about whether Emily had eaten a proper meal recently, which Emily deflected politely, and Ruth ignored entirely. "You're too thin," Ruth said, setting a second plate of biscuits on the table. Emily blinked. "Ma'am?" "Under all that," Ruth said, waving a hand, "a body can be big and still be running on nothing. You've got that look, the hollow one." Emily did not know what to say to that. Nobody had ever looked at her and seen past the outside to whatever was running on empty underneath. She ate. William ate across from her and didn't say much, but once when Emily reached for the salt, and her sleeve pulled back and the burn scar on her left forearm showed the one from the fire, the one she usually kept covered, he noticed. She saw him notice. She pulled the sleeve down. He didn't say anything. He looked at his plate, but something in the set of his shoulders changed. Like a man quietly rearranging something inside himself that needed to be rearranged. Jack. The second day was harder. Not the work she could manage. The second day brought Harlow Creek to the ranch. 3 women arrived mid-morning on foot, in the carefully arranged way of women who have decided to make a social call that is actually an ambush. They stood at the gate and called for William, and when he appeared, they smiled at him and ignored Emily so completely that it was almost impressive. "We just wanted to check on you," the tallest one said. Her name was Mrs. Patton, and Emily had seen her on the boardwalk the day of arrival standing next to the woman who had said Lord Almighty. "We've been worried." "I'm fine," William said. "We heard you'd taken on a—" Mrs. Patton's eyes slid to Emily, and off again so fast it could have passed for an accident. "A new hand." "That's right. Is that—" She lowered her voice in the particular way people lower their voices when they want you to hear exactly what they're saying. "Is that wise, William, given the optics?" "The optics," William repeated. "People are talking." "People always talk," he said. "I've never found it to be a good reason to run my ranch differently." Mrs. Patton's smile stiffened. She tried once more. "It's just that a woman like that, a woman of her size, she simply isn't suited." "Mrs. Patton," William said, "Emily walked this fence line with me yesterday morning, and she found the breach in the east section that my last 2 hands missed entirely. I'd say she's suited fine." Emily kept her eyes on the work in front of her, a length of fence post that needed resetting, and she did not let her hands stop moving, and she did not let the warmth that had risen unexpectedly in her chest show on her face. He'd told them what she'd done, not what she looked like. What she'd done. When the women left, William came back to the fence and picked up the other end of the post without comment. They reset it together. Neither of them spoke. But Emily noticed that after that, William stopped walking 3 steps ahead of her and started walking beside her instead. She didn't know if he was aware of it. She didn't ask. She just noted it and filed it and kept working. 4 days in, she found the problem. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd been walking the south pasture checking water troughs when she noticed the pattern 3 sections of land near the creek where the grass had gone wrong in a specific way, thin and yellowed in lines that didn't match the rest of the drought pattern. She stopped, looked, walked the lines twice. She found William by the barn. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "can I show you something?" He followed her without question. She walked him to the south pasture and showed him the lines. "Something's been diverting the creek water," she said. "These patterns, the way the yellowing goes in straight lines on both sides, that doesn't happen naturally. Something upstream is redirecting flow. Your cattle in the south pasture aren't getting proper water even when there's water in the creek." William stood very still, looking at the ground she was pointing to. "How do you know what natural drought patterns look like?" he asked. "My father had the same problem once," she said. "Someone upstream from us built a berm to redirect irrigation. Took him 2 seasons to figure out what was happening. We lost a third of our cattle before he found it." William turned to look at her. The gray eyes had changed. Not dramatically, he wasn't a dramatic man, but something in them was different. More focused, more present. "Who's upstream from me on the creek?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "Collins," he said. The name landed between them like a stone. Emily looked at him. "Mr. Dawson," she said carefully, "I think someone has been deliberately redirecting your water." The silence that followed was long and not comfortable. "I need to ride up and check," he said finally. "Would you like me to come?" He looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that she thought he was going to say no. Long enough that she already had her argument ready. She'd found it. She knew what to look for. 2 sets of eyes were better than 1. "Yeah," he said. "Get your horse." The ride upstream took 40 minutes. They found the berm an hour after that, not a large structure, not something that would attract attention, but exactly what Emily had described. A deliberate diversion. Stones and timber and packed earth sitting in the creek at an angle that pushed the flow toward Collins' land and away from Dawson's south pasture. William sat on his horse and looked at it for a long time. Emily watched him. She could see the thing happening in him, the calculation running, the anger that he wasn't going to let out here, the particular controlled fury of a man who had just understood that something he believed was bad luck was actually something someone had done to him on purpose. "How long?" he said finally. "The yellowing pattern I saw." Emily said, "I'd guess 2, maybe 3 months. 2 or 3 months of believing his land was failing. 2 or 3 months of Collins' land doing fine by comparison. 2 or 3 months of a problem that looked like weather and drought and bad fortune and was none of those things." "He's going to say this is natural," William said. "Yes, sir?" "He's going to say he doesn't know anything about it." "Yes, sir, he will." William looked at the berm. Then he looked at Emily. "But you can show me how to prove otherwise," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," Emily said. "I can." Something shifted in the air between them. Not soft, not romantic. Something harder than that and more lasting, the particular thing that happens when 2 people recognize in each other someone who can be trusted to tell the truth and stand behind it. William Dawson turned his horse around. "Then let's get to work," he said. Emily turned her horse and followed him back down the creek, and for the first time since the fire took everything she had ever known. She did not feel like the girl nobody wanted. She felt like exactly the right person in exactly the right place. She didn't know yet what that was going to cost her. She didn't know yet what it was going to give her back. But she rode south through the Wyoming afternoon beside the loneliest man in the county. And something in her chest, something she had kept very carefully sealed for a very long time, opened just a little, just enough to let the light in. The ride back from the creek was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one Emily had grown used to from William Dawson. Before, his silence had been the silence of a man who simply did not feel the need to speak. Efficient. Contained. The silence of someone who had lived alone long enough that words had started to feel like extra weight. This silence was working. She could feel it coming off him, the rapid, controlled processing of a man who had just understood that his bad luck had a name, and that name was Henry Collins. And Collins had been sitting across from him at the church social, and the town meetings, and the general store counter for 3 months, while Dawson cattle went thirsty a mile downstream. Emily did not interrupt it. She had learned early in life that there were moments when the most useful thing you could do for a person was leave them alone inside their own head. Her father had been the same way, a man who needed to think in silence before he could talk, and who became someone else entirely if you pushed him before he was ready. They were halfway back to the ranch when William finally spoke. "My father built that south pasture," he said. Not to her exactly. More like a thought that had gotten too heavy to carry quietly. "Spent 3 summers on it. Said it was the best grazing land in the county if you kept the water right." Emily waited. "He wasn't wrong," William said. "And Collins knows it. He's always known it." "What does Collins want with your water rights?" Emily asked. "He doesn't want the water," William said. "He wants me to think the land is failing. He wants me stretched thin. He wants me looking at numbers that don't work and wondering if my father was wrong about this place." He paused. "And then he wants to make me an offer." Emily looked at him. "He's done this before. 3 ranches in 5 years, William said. All of them had problems that looked like bad luck. 2 of them sold to Collins inside of 18 months. 1 held on, and then his barn burned." The last sentence was said without expression, and that expressionlessness was somehow worse than if he'd said it with anger. Nobody could prove anything. Emily was quiet for a moment. "He underestimated you," she said. "He underestimated my south pasture," William said. "I just didn't know what I was looking at." He glanced at her, then a quick look, but direct. "You did." Emily didn't answer that. She looked ahead at the road, but she felt it settle into her chest, that look, that sentence, and she let it stay there because she was so unaccustomed to being the person who knew something useful that the feeling of it was almost foreign, almost suspicious, like something that might be taken back. She did not let herself trust it fully yet, but she did not push it away either. That evening, after the work was done and Ruth had fed them and the sun had dropped behind the ridge to the west, Emily sat on the bunkhouse step with her father's old farm ledger open in her lap. She'd carried it out of the fire with her, grabbed it off the table in the first terrible minute when the smoke had been more smell than substance, and she'd had just enough time to take one thing. She'd taken the ledger. She was copying out the water diversion diagrams her father had sketched years ago, translating them into the specific geography of Dawson land as best as she could reconstruct it from the afternoon's ride. She didn't hear William approach until he was standing 6 feet away. "What's that?" he asked. "My father's notes," she said. "He documented everything he found when it happened to us. The angles, the flow rates, the evidence that separates a natural obstruction from a built one." She held the ledger out. "He did it because he said someday someone else might need to prove the same thing." William took it. He stood there in the last of the evening light and read it with the same focused attention he gave to everything, completely without pretending to be faster than he was. He was quiet for a long time. "Your father sounds like a careful man," he said. "He was," Emily said. "He was the most careful man I ever knew. He said a ranch was a record of everything you paid attention to." She looked at her hands. "The fire started while he was in town. He didn't make it back in time to save much." William handed the ledger back. He was looking at her, not the ledger. "He make it out?" he asked, and his voice had that particular careful flatness of a man who already knew the answer. "No, sir," Emily said. The night settled around that. William sat down on the step beside her. Not close. There was a foot of space between them, and he held it, and somehow the fact that he sat down at all, that he didn't go back to the house that he stayed, was the thing that mattered. "Mine neither," he said. "Different circumstances, but—" He stopped. Emily did not push. "He built everything here," William said after a while. "Every fence post, every water line, every structure on this land. I've been taking care of it for 12 years, and sometimes I still walk a section and find something he built that I didn't know about. Like the man is still talking to me through the work." He paused. "Is that a strange thing to say?" "No," Emily said quietly. "That's not strange at all." They sat with the dark coming in around them, and the cattle settling somewhere past the tree line, and the stars beginning to assert themselves overhead. and neither of them said anything more, and it was not awkward. It was the kind of quiet that two people can only sit in together if something true has passed between them. Emily went to bed that night thinking about her father's hands on the farm ledger pages, and the way William Dawson's voice had gone rough and then steadied itself, and the foot of careful distance he had kept on that porch step. And she thought, this is a man who has also been carrying something alone for a very long time. She did not know yet what that meant. She only knew she recognized it. The next morning brought trouble before the coffee was poured. A boy from town came riding up the drive at 6:30, a kid of maybe 14, who looked like he'd been ridden hard on his own errand, nervous and fast, and unwilling to get off his horse. "Message for Mr. Dawson," the boy said. "From Mr. Collins's office." William took the envelope. He read it standing in the yard, and Emily watched from the barn door as his face went through three distinct things: recognition, anger held down tight, and then a settling into something colder and more deliberate than either. He folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket. "What is it?" Ruth asked from the kitchen doorway. "Collins is calling in the note on the south pasture fence repairs," William said. $1,200. He says it's due by end of the month or he'll file a lien on the pasture land. Emily came out of the barn. "He holds a note on your fence repairs. I borrowed from the Harlow Creek lending office 2 years ago," William said. "Collins owns it. I didn't know that when I signed. Found out 6 months later." His voice was level, too level. The voice of a man keeping something under a lid. "He's never called it early before." "Because he's never needed to," Emily said. "He's calling it now because of the berm. He knows someone rode the creek. He's moving faster." William looked at her. "You think he saw us? I think this county is small and he has friends," Emily said. "And I think the timing is not a coincidence." Ruth made a sound from the doorway that was half profanity and half prayer and entirely accurate. William stood in the yard for a moment, the kind of still that is not passivity, but is, in fact, a man holding himself together with both hands while his mind works the problem. "I don't have $1,200 liquid," he said. "Not right now. Not with the losses from the south pasture." "Then we document the berm," Emily said. "We document it, we tie Collins to it, and we take it to someone who can do something about it. A territorial judge, a federal land office, someone who isn't in Collins's pocket. That takes time." "Yes." "He'll file the lien before we can get documentation in front of anyone." "Then we move faster than he expects," Emily said. She heard her own voice and was briefly startled by it, by the certainty in it, by the way she'd taken the problem and turned it in her hands like a tool she knew how to use. She was not the sort of person who spoke with that kind of certainty. She had not been that person in a very long time. Maybe not ever. William was watching her with those steady gray eyes. "You know how to document water diversion evidence," he said. "My father had to do it once," Emily said. "I helped him. We didn't win in the end. The man upstream was too well connected. But I know what proper documentation looks like. I know what a judge would need to see." William held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Long enough that Emily resisted the urge to look away, and resisting that urge cost her something, because looking back at him steadily was harder than she wanted it to be. "All right," he said. "We leave in an hour. Bring the ledger." They spent the better part of 2 days at the creek. Emily measured and William wrote and Ruth sent food with a ranch hand who didn't ask questions. They worked with the methodical intensity of people who know they are in a race they cannot afford to lose, and have decided that losing is simply not an option they're entertaining. On the second afternoon, when they had crouched for an hour over the water flow angles, and Emily's knees were filing formal complaints, and her hair had staged a full rebellion against its braid, William said, without looking up from the sketch he was making. "Why did you come to Wyoming?" Emily sat back, stretched her legs. "I told you, there was nothing left in Cheyenne." "There's nothing in most places for a woman alone," he said. "That's not specific to Cheyenne. Why here?" She was quiet for a moment. Someone told me once that the territories were different, she said. That out here what mattered was whether you could work, whether you had sense, whether you'd stay when things got hard. She looked at the creek. They said back east people judged you before you opened your mouth, but out west they gave you a chance to prove yourself first. William made a low sound. Not agreement exactly, more like consideration. Whoever told you that, he said, had clearly not spent time in Harlow Creek. Emily laughed. It surprised her. It surprised him too. She saw him look up briefly with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something almost startled. No, she said. I don't think they had. He looked back at his sketch, but the line of his shoulders had changed, loosened slightly. How long did it take you to get here from Cheyenne? He asked. 3 weeks, she said. I walked when I couldn't get a ride. I worked wherever someone would let me for a day or two, earned enough to keep going. She paused. I applied for 6 ranch positions on the way. None of them would see me past the first look. His pencil stopped moving. 6, he said. Yes, sir. He was quiet for a moment. Why'd you keep going after the 3rd or the 4th? Emily looked at her father's ledger open on her knee, at the familiar handwriting, at the careful records of a man who had believed that documentation was a form of respect for the work, for the truth, for the people who would come after and need to know what happened. Because quitting felt like proving them right, she said. And I wasn't willing to do that. William picked up the pencil again. He drew a precise line on the sketch. Good, he said. And that was all, just that one word. But the way he said it, not as comfort or as sympathy, or as the kind of thing people say when they're trying to be encouraging, the way he said it, as simple factual assessment, like a man acknowledging something that was objectively true and worth noting. It hit Emily somewhere underneath her ribs. She looked back at the creek and breathed and did not say anything else. On the 3rd morning, Mrs. Patton came back. This time she brought 4 women and a purpose. They arrived at the ranch house while William was up at the north fence and Emily was in the yard splitting wood, a task she had volunteered for because it turned out she was good at it, better than she'd expected. And there was something satisfying about the clean authority of the axe and the way the wood gave. Mrs. Patton surveyed the scene with an expression that could only be called aggressively concerned. Miss Carter, she said, I wonder if we might have a word. Emily set the axe down, straightened up. She did not miss the way the other 4 women arranged themselves, not quite flanking Mrs. Patton, but close. A social formation. A wall with pretty wallpaper. Of course, Emily said. We're worried about you, Mrs. Patton said. And there it was, the particular opening gambit of women who want to say something cruel and have decided to perform it as kindness first. Emily had heard it before. She knew exactly how this went. I appreciate that, Emily said. It's just that, and I say this with your best interests at heart, I truly do, this situation is not suitable. Mrs. Patton lowered her voice. A woman alone on a man's ranch. The town is talking. Mr. Dawson's reputation is... Mrs. Patton, Emily said, and something in her voice made the woman stop. What exactly are you asking me to do? Silence. Mrs. Patton reoriented. I'm suggesting that perhaps... Are you asking me to leave? Emily said. Direct. No cruelty. No heat. Just the question stripped bare. The woman blinked. She had clearly expected tears or apologies, or the defensive flustering of someone who could be redirected and managed. I'm suggesting it would be better... Better for who? Emily said. Another silence. Longer this time. Miss Carter, one of the other women said, stepping in, a younger woman, softer-faced, with the look of someone who had been asked to come along and was already regretting it. We only mean... I know what you mean, Emily said quietly, and I understand that you believe you're right. But I have a job here. Mr. Dawson hired me fairly, and I do fair work. That's the whole of it. She looked at Mrs. Patton. If there's something specific I've done that's caused a problem, tell me and I'll address it. If it's only about how I look, then I don't think there's anything we have to say to each other. Mrs. Patton's face went through several things quickly. Then she turned and walked back out the gate, her formation following. The younger woman paused at the gate. She turned back. "For what it's worth," she said quietly enough that only Emily could hear. "I think you're brave." She left before Emily could respond. Emily picked up the axe. She split 4 more pieces before her hands stopped shaking. William came back from the north fence at midday to find Ruth in the kitchen with the expression she wore when she knew something had happened and was waiting for the right moment to say so. "What?" he said. "Mrs. Patton paid a call," Ruth said, his jaw set. "Emily all right?" "She split a cord of wood after they left," Ruth said. "So either she's all right or she's working through something. Hard to tell with that girl." William went to the kitchen window. Emily was still in the yard, not at the wood anymore, sitting on the fence rail with her father's ledger in her lap, her hair coming down from the braid, working through something on the page. Her posture was straight. Whatever the morning had cost her, she was not carrying it in her body. He stood there longer than he needed to. Ruth said nothing, which was itself something. He went out to the yard. Emily heard him coming and looked up. She had that expression she sometimes had, the one he'd started to recognize where she was deciding how much to say. "I heard Patton came by," he said. "Yes, sir." "She give you trouble?" "She gave it her best effort," Emily said, and there was something almost wry in it. William stopped at the fence. He leaned against the post opposite her. "I'll speak to her," he said. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to." Emily looked at him. There was a pause that held something in it. "I handled it," she said. "I know you did," he said. "I'm going to speak to her anyway." She stared at him for a moment, like she was trying to locate the catch in it. The thing he wanted in return for the gesture. There wasn't one. He just looked back at her. She looked down at the ledger. "All right," she said. He straightened up from the post and started back toward the barn. He was 3 steps away when she said, "Mr. Dawson." He stopped. "Thank you," she said, quietly. Like the words cost her something she hadn't budgeted for. He nodded once and kept walking. But he did not go directly to the barn. He stood on the far side of it for a moment, just out of her sightline, and breathed the hot afternoon air, and asked himself a question he was not yet ready to answer. He had told himself when he'd hired her that it was purely practical, that he'd seen a capable person who needed work and made a rational decision unaffected by Collins's social pressure. He was starting to understand that was only part of the truth. The twist came on a Thursday. Emily had ridden into Harlow Creek for supplies. William's list, 2 pages. Ruth's handwriting at the bottom, adding 3 items in the margins. The general store was the kind of place that always had 2 or 3 people in it, regardless of the hour, and Emily had learned to move through it efficiently, to not linger to get what she'd come for, and leave before the watching became a conversation. She was at the counter waiting for the clerk to total her order when she heard it. 2 men near the door. Ranchers by the look of them. Voices not lowered quite enough. "Collins is moving on the Dawson note," the first one said. "End of the month. He's calling every favor he's got with the Territorial Bank. Even if Dawson pays the $1,200, there's a secondary claim, something about back taxes on the water rights. Collins has had it filed for months, just been waiting. Dawson can't fight 2 fronts," the second one said. "Not with that pasture producing half what it should." "Nobody's saying it out loud," the first one said, "but everybody knows. Dawson's land is worth 4 times what Collins will offer him. And Collins knows exactly when a man gets desperate enough to take a low offer just to end it." Emily stood at the counter and did not move and kept her face completely still. The secondary claim. Back taxes on the water rights. The berm documentation would address the water diversion, but if Collins had filed a separate claim, a paper claim, a legal one, buried in territorial records, that was a different problem. That was something that could survive, even if they proved the diversion. Something that could bleed William dry, through legal costs and delays, while the cattle still went thirsty. Emily paid for the supplies. She loaded the wagon with careful, normal movements. She drove back toward the ranch at a normal pace. She was a mile outside of town when she pulled the horses to a stop on an empty stretch of road. She sat there for a moment, completely alone with the Wyoming summer pressing down on everything. She thought about the 6 ranches she'd applied to. About 3 weeks of walking. About 6 positions that never got past the first look. About Colin's face the first day she'd arrived, the contemptuous gesture, the assumption that she was a problem to be dismissed. He had been so certain she was irrelevant, that she was nothing, that she was just a fat girl from nowhere who would be gone by the end of the week. She picked up the reins. She drove back to the ranch faster than she'd left it. William was in the barn when she came through the gate. She unhitched the wagon with more efficiency than usual and was through the barn door before he'd finished what he was doing. "I need to talk to you," she said. He turned from the horse he was tending. He read her face. "What happened?" She told him. All of it word for word, as close as she could reconstruct it. The 2 men at the general store, the secondary claim, the back taxes filing, the timing of it. She did not editorialize. She did not tell him how to feel about it. She laid it out the same way her father had taught her to lay out evidence, clear, sequential, complete. When she finished, William was quiet. She watched him. She watched him take it in, and she watched the thing happen that she had seen happen only once before, on the ride back from the creek, when he'd first understood that Collins was behind the water loss. But this time it was worse, because this time he was understanding that the attack was on multiple fronts, and had been planned for longer than either of them had realized. "He's had the tax claim filed for months," William said. "That's what they said. And he's been waiting for the right moment to use it." "Yes. Because once he calls it in, even if I can prove the water diversion, I'm fighting on 2 legal fronts simultaneously with a depleted operation." He said it almost to himself, working through it. "He doesn't need to win both. He just needs to make it expensive enough that I sell." "Yes," Emily said. "That's what I think too." William leaned against the stall door. He crossed his arms. He looked at the floor. She gave him the silence. When he looked up, his eyes had gone somewhere different. Past the immediate problem, past the anger, into something more fundamental. "My father spent 40 years on this land," he said. "He built every structure on it. He broke the ground and ran the first cattle and sank the first well." He looked at her. "This land is the last thing he left. If Collins takes it—" He stopped. Emily looked at him, this contained and careful man, who did not ask for help, and did not display what he was feeling, and had been running his dead father's ranch for 12 years, with nothing but the work to hold him. "He's not going to take it," Emily said. William looked at her. "We have the documentation on the berm," she said. "We have my father's evidence templates. We have the testimony of a water diversion that we can tie to a specific timeline that contradicts Collins's ownership of Clean Hands. And the tax claim—" She stopped, took a breath. "The tax claim can be challenged if it was filed on falsified water rights records. If Collins diverted the water and then filed taxes on water rights, he'd effectively stolen. That's fraud. Not just a civil dispute. Fraud." William stared at her. "You know territorial property law," he said. It was not quite a question. "My father had a lawyer friend in Cheyenne," Emily said. "He used to come to Sunday dinner and talk about everything he was working on. I was 15 when the irrigation dispute happened. I sat at that table for 3 years and listened." She paused. "I don't know everything, but I know enough to know this is not a losing fight. It's a fight that has to be fought right." Something crossed his face. Not one thing, but several moving too fast to name individually, settling finally into something that might have been, if you knew how to read the face of a man who kept everything inside, the look of someone who has been carrying something alone for so long, that the offer of a hand is almost more disorienting than the weight itself. "Why are you doing this?" he said, quietly, not accusatory, genuinely asking. Emily held his gaze. "Because it's right," she said. And because you gave me a job when nobody else would, and you stood in front of Collins and those men, and you said she stays. And nobody has said that for me in a very long time." She stopped. "So I'm going to make sure this land stays, because it's yours. And it's right." The barn was very quiet. William looked at her for a long moment with those winter sky eyes, and Emily stood there and let herself be looked at in a way that had nothing to do with the things people usually looked at when they looked at her. "All right," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. He pushed off the stall door and stood up straight. "Then let's figure out how to fight it." They started that same night. Ruth made coffee and didn't ask questions, which was her way of saying she understood this was serious and intended to help by staying out of it. She left the pot on the stove and went to bed, and the kitchen belonged to William and Emily, and the papers spread across the table between them. Emily had the ledger open. William had the original note from Collins' lending office, a survey map of the creek that had belonged to his father, and a territorial land record he'd pulled from the tin box under his bed, the kind of box that holds the documents a man hopes he'll never need. They worked by lamplight. Emily walked him through the documentation framework her father's lawyer friend had described at those Sunday dinners 15 years ago. What a court needed to see. What made the difference between an allegation and a provable case? The specific language of water rights fraud under territorial law, and what distinguished it from a simple civil property dispute. William listened, the way he did everything completely, without pretending to be faster than he was asking 2 or 3 precise questions that told her he had understood everything she'd said, and wanted to go deeper on the parts that mattered. At some point past midnight, Ruth reappeared in the doorway in her robe, looked at the table, left a plate of cold cornbread between them without comment, and disappeared again. Neither of them acknowledged it. But Emily ate 3 pieces and noticed that William ate 2. And something about the small domestic fact of it, the cornbread, the lamplight, the papers between them, the 2 of them building something together in the middle of the night, hit her in a way she wasn't prepared for. She looked at the survey map and breathed and kept working. At 1 in the morning, William said, "We need someone who can file in the territorial court, someone Collins doesn't own. Is there anyone like that in Harlow Creek?" "No," he said flatly. "Nearest territorial court? Casper. 2 days' ride." "Then we need to ride to Casper," Emily said. William looked at the papers. He looked at the calendar on the wall. "Collins' deadline on the note is 18 days out," he said. "The secondary tax claim, I don't know the timeline. Could be less." "Then we go in the next 2 days," Emily said, "before he knows we're moving." William was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once the way he nodded when something was decided. "I'll need someone to watch the ranch," he said. "And the cattle need—" "I'll handle the south pasture before we leave," Emily said. "Ruth can manage the house. You trust any of your hands?" "Tom Briggs?" he said. "He's been with me 6 years. He's straight." "Then we leave day after tomorrow," Emily said. "I'll have the documentation packet ready." William looked at her across the table. She had seen that look before now, the one she couldn't fully decode. It wasn't the way people looked at her in town. It wasn't pity or contempt, or that particular species of amusement that big women attracted in public spaces. It was something more careful than any of those things, more deliberate. She did not ask what it meant. She looked back at the ledger and drew the next diagram and kept going. They left before sunrise 2 mornings later. The ride to Casper was long and dry and hot, and they made good time because William set a pace that assumed you could handle it, and Emily matched it without complaint. And somewhere around the 6-hour mark, she understood that this was itself a kind of statement that she was still there, still keeping up, still not asking to stop. They stopped once at midday to water the horses and eat the food Ruth had packed with the efficiency of a woman who had been feeding working people all her life. William handed her a canteen and sat down on a rock 4 feet from her and said without preamble, "Tell me about your father's farm, what it looked like before." It was not the question she expected. She looked at him. "Why?" she said. "Because you've told me what happened to it," he said. I want to know what it was." Emily was quiet for a moment. She held the canteen. "It was smaller than yours," she said. "About 60 head, when it was doing well. My father had a particular way of managing the rotation. He'd worked it out over years through trial and error, and he kept notes on everything, which is where I got the habit." She stopped. "There was a kitchen garden my mother had planted before she died. He kept it going after, said the garden was hers and it would stay hers." She looked at the ground. "That burned too." William did not say he was sorry. She had noticed that about him he didn't say things that didn't help just because they were expected. He let things be what they were. "You learned to run a ranch from a man who kept notes on everything," he said. "I did." "And you walked 3 weeks across Wyoming to find a job that might not want you." "Yes." "Carrying his notes with you." Emily looked up. He was watching her with an expression that was different from any she'd seen on him before. Not the controlled assessment, not the steady professionalism. Something beneath both of those, the face of a man who is seeing something he had not expected to see and is not sure yet what to do about it. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He stood up. He picked up his hat from where he'd set it beside the rock. "He raised somebody worth raising," he said. Then he walked back to the horses. Emily sat there for the moment after he'd gone. She pressed her palm flat against the surface of the rock she was sitting on. Solid. Real. The physical world insisting on itself. She had not cried in 4 months. She had determined not to cry until something was fixed, until she was somewhere, until she was working, until she was not actively in freefall. That had seemed like a sensible rule at the time. She blinked. She breathed. She stood up. She walked back to the horses. The territorial court office in Casper was a narrow building wedged between a land surveyor and a telegraph office, and it smelled like old paper and lamp oil and the specific exhaustion of governmental work conducted in an under-resourced jurisdiction. The clerk was a thin man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, who looked at William and then at Emily, and then at the stack of documents Emily set on his counter, and then back at Emily, with the expression of a man recalibrating. "What is this?" he asked. "Water rights fraud documentation," Emily said. "We're filing a complaint against a diversion structure built on Clear Creek, approximately 3 miles north of Harlow Creek Township. We're also contesting a secondary tax claim filed against the Dawson property on the basis that the claim was predicated on falsified water rights records." The clerk looked at William. William looked at the clerk. "What she said," William said. The clerk looked back at Emily. She held his gaze. He picked up the top document. He read it. He put it down. He picked up the second one. 20 minutes later he said, "This is a substantial filing." "Yes, sir," Emily said. "It's meant to be." "You have surveyed evidence of the diversion structure, measured, documented, and cross-referenced against the original creek survey from the Dawson land grant," Emily said. "You'll find it in the 3rd section. The angles and flow rate measurements are consistent with constructed diversion, not natural obstruction, and inconsistent with the drought patterns in the surrounding area for the past season." The clerk looked at her over his reading glasses, not unkindly, more like a man who had processed a great many filings from a great many ranchers and was encountering something he had not encountered before. "You prepare this yourself," he said. "With Mr. Dawson," Emily said. "The framework is based on documentation from a similar case in the Cheyenne jurisdiction in 1879. You familiar with the 1879 Cheyenne water rights precedent? My father was party to it," Emily said. "On the losing side, unfortunately. But we have better evidence here." The clerk set the documents down on his counter and looked at both of them for a moment. "Filing fee is $4, he said. "I'll have the case number to you by end of business. The presiding judge will review preliminary merits within 10 days. If he finds grounds, you'll have a hearing date." "How long for the hearing?" William asked. 30 to 60 days typically," the clerk said. "The opposing party has a note due in 18 days, Emily said, "and a secondary claim that may be called sooner." We'd like to request expedited preliminary review on the grounds that the opposing party may attempt to execute financial instruments against the defendant's land while the fraud complaint is under review." The clerk blinked. "That," he said slowly, "is a legitimate legal argument." "Yes, sir," Emily said. "I know." He looked at William again. "Where'd you find her?" he said. William's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Close enough. "She found me," he said. They stayed the night in Casper at a boarding house and rode back the next morning, and there was a different quality to the silence on the return trip. Not the tense working silence of the ride out, but something that had settled. The kind of quiet that comes after something has been done and can't be undone, and you are now waiting to see what the world does with it. They were an hour from the ranch when the storm came. It didn't announce itself the way storms sometimes did. No slow buildup, no gradual darkening. The Wyoming sky simply decided in the way of high summer in the territories that it was done with being clear. The first crack of lightning hit the ridge to the north, and the horses reacted instantly, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees in the time it took Emily to grab her reins tight and bring her mare back under control. "Ride," William called over the wind that had arrived from nowhere. They rode. The rain hit hard and without apology. Within minutes, Emily was soaked through completely the road under the horses' hooves, turning uncertain, the visibility dropping fast. She could hear her mare's breathing over the storm, and she stayed low and kept the horse steady and kept her eyes on William's back in front of her, because he knew this land and she trusted him to get them through it. They made it to the ranch with 10 minutes to spare before the full storm hit. Emily barely registered dismounting. She was focused on the horses, getting them into the barn, rubbing them down, checking their legs, the automatic priority of someone raised to put the animals first. William was alongside her doing the same, and they moved around each other in the close space of the barn, with the storm hammering the roof above them, working fast, and without words, passing things to each other. The brush, the blanket, the water bucket, in the wordless coordination they had developed over the past 2 weeks. It was only when the horses were settled and they stood in the middle of the barn with the storm raging outside that Emily registered properly how wet and cold she was. She was shaking, trying not to, failing. William looked at her. "You're freezing," he said. "I'm fine," she said. Her teeth were not quite chattering. Close. "You're not fine," he said. He took off his jacket, his heavy work jacket that he'd put on when the temperature dropped, and held it out. Emily stared at it. "Mr. Dawson." "Take it," he said, not roughly, just with the particular certainty of a man who has made a decision and is not interested in debating it. She took it. She pulled it on over her soaked dress, and the warmth of it hit her like a physical thing. Not just temperature, but weight, the solid reality of it, the way it smelled like leather and cedar, and the particular outdoor smell of a man who worked in all weather. She felt her shaking slow. She did not say anything about any of that. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He turned to check on his own horse one more time. Emily stood in the barn in his jacket and listened to the storm and understood with a clarity that was not comfortable that she was in a great deal of trouble. Not the Collins kind, not the legal kind, the other kind. The kind she had told herself she would not be in again after 2 previous occasions in her life. When she had let herself want something she was not going to be allowed to have. She was very careful to keep her face completely neutral. The storm lasted 6 hours. Tom Briggs, the ranch hand William trusted, had managed the cattle before the worst of it hit, and reported in the morning that the losses were minimal. 2 fences down in the east section, some roof damage on the smaller outbuilding, nothing that couldn't be repaired. William assessed the damage with the controlled efficiency of a man who had weathered storms on this land before. Emily helped with the fence repair. She had gotten competent enough at post setting by now that she could hold her end without William having to correct her. And they worked the east section through the morning in the aftermath of the storm, the air smelling of wet earth and lightning-cleared sky. It was Tom Briggs who brought the news. He came up on horseback at just past noon, and Emily knew from the way he reined in too fast, Too direct, the body language of a man carrying something hot, that it was bad. "Ryder came through from Harlow Creek this morning," Tom said. "Collins is calling an emergency creditors meeting at the Harlow Creek Town Hall. Tonight." William straightened up from the fence post. "On what grounds?" "He's saying the Dawson property represents a failing investment," Tom said. "He's presenting to the bank board and the local lenders, showing them numbers." Tom's jaw was tight. "Numbers that say this ranch can't recover, that it's a liability." Emily looked at William. "He's moving before our filing reaches him," she said. "If he gets the local bank board to declare the property a bad risk," William said slowly, "they can accelerate any outstanding instruments, the $1,200 note, anything else they hold." "And he controls who sits on that board," Emily said. "4 of the 7, William said. "Always has." Tom said, "Meeting's at 7 tonight. Word is Collins has already spoken to 3 of the 4 he controls." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when people are running numbers and none of the numbers are coming out in their favor. Emily said, "Who are the 3 he doesn't control?" William looked at her. "Chester Moore, who runs the feed supply. Hank Ellison, who's been on the board 30 years and doesn't move for anyone. And Margaret Yates, who's the only woman on the board and who Collins has been trying to remove for 2 years because she won't do what he tells her." "Then we need to be at that meeting," Emily said. "It's a creditors' meeting," William said. "I can attend as the debtor. You can't." "I'm not going as a creditor," Emily said. "I'm going as the person who prepared your documentation. If Collins is presenting numbers tonight, someone needs to be there who can contest them with actual numbers." She looked at him steadily. "Unless you'd rather go alone." Something moved through his face. "No," he said. "I wouldn't rather." They were at the town hall at 10 minutes to 7. Emily had changed into the best dress she had, which was not much, but she had pressed it with Ruth's iron and braided her hair tight and stood up as straight as she could stand. William had put on a clean shirt and jacket and shaved, and beside her as they walked through the town hall door, he looked like exactly what he was, a man who owned his land and intended to keep owning it. The room was already full. Harlow Creek was a small town. A creditors' meeting called by Henry Collins was apparently a social event. Half the town had shown up in addition to the board members, and when William and Emily came through the door, the specific silence that Emily had grown accustomed to, the one that was about her, spread through the room like a lit fuse. She heard it. She felt it. She kept walking. Collins was at the front of the room. He saw them come in, and his expression moved from satisfaction to something more complicated in the space of a second. Not quite alarm, but a recalibration. A man updating his expectations. "Dawson," he said. "Collins," William said. Collins's eyes moved to Emily. They stayed there for a moment. "This is a creditors' meeting," he said. "It's not open to—" "Mr. Dawson's representative is permitted to attend any meeting pertaining to his financial instruments," Emily said. Her voice was clear enough to carry. "That's Territorial Statute 47 regarding debtor representation rights. I'm happy to cite the full section if it would be useful." The room was very quiet. Collins looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. In all their previous encounters, he had looked at her with contempt, the easy, certain contempt of a man who has never had to take seriously something he has decided doesn't matter. He was taking her seriously now. She could see it, and she could see that he didn't like it not one bit, and that his dislike of it was running up against the fact that there were 40 people in this room watching him handle it. "Fine," he said. The word came out stripped of warmth. They found seats. Margaret Yates, a compact woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades refusing to be diminished, caught Emily's eye from across the room and gave her the briefest possible nod. Emily filed it away. Collins began his presentation. He was good at this. Emily had to give him that. He had the manner of a man who presented bad news with apparent reluctance, framing numbers as concerns, framing his own position as that of a worried community member, simply doing his civic duty. The cattle losses due to drought. The South pasture productivity decline. The note called early due to what he characterized as deteriorating asset value. The secondary tax claim as a matter of legal obligation. He built his case brick by brick, and each brick sounded reasonable, and Emily sat in her chair and watched and listened, and did not move. Chester Moore raised his hand. "What's the actual water situation out on the Dawson South pasture? I've heard different things." "Drought conditions," Collins said smoothly. "Same as affecting many properties in the county. Unfortunately, the Dawson land seems to have been particularly impacted." Emily stood up. "That's not accurate," she said. The room swiveled toward her. Collins' face tightened. "Miss, the South pasture water deficit is not the result of drought," Emily said. She was speaking to the room, to the 7 board members, to Margaret Yates and Chester Moore, and Hank Ellison in particular. "It is the result of a constructed diversion structure built on Clear Creek approximately 3 miles north of the Dawson property, redirecting natural water flow away from Dawson land and toward adjacent property." She paused. "We filed documentation of this structure with surveyed measurements and evidentiary photographs with the territorial court in Casper 2 days ago." The room erupted, not loudly. The eruption was the sound of 40 people all reacting at once in a space that was trying to hold them. Collins talked over it, his voice rising. "This is a fabrication. There is no such structure. This woman has no standing to." "The filing number is case 7432, Emily said, raising her own voice exactly enough to be heard, not enough to seem out of control. "The presiding judge has flagged it for expedited review on the grounds that financial instruments may be executed against the property while the fraud complaint is pending. Which is exactly what Mr. Collins is attempting to do tonight." "Fraud," Collins said, and now his voice had an edge in it that had not been there before. "You are making a very serious accusation." "Yes, sir," Emily said. "I am." Hank Ellison, who had been on the board for 30 years and whom Collins had never managed to move, leaned forward. "If there's a territorial court filing pending on water rights fraud," he said, his voice carrying the specific gravity of a man who had sat through a great many financial disputes and understood what they meant, "then this board cannot in good conscience execute any financial instruments against the property in question while that filing is under review. That would constitute potential interference with a territorial court proceeding." Collins turned on him. "Hank, it's not a political opinion," Ellison said. "It's a legal one." The 3 board members Collins controlled were looking at Collins now, and the look was one of men who had expected a smooth operation and were no longer confident they were in one. Margaret Yates said, "I'd like to see the filing documentation." "I have copies," Emily said. She opened the leather satchel she'd brought and produced 3 packets of paper prepared specifically for exactly this moment. She handed one to Yates, one to Ellison, one to Moore. Collins was staring at her. She looked back at him, and in the 3 seconds that they held each other's gaze across that room, with 40 people watching, and the board members reading her documentation, and William Dawson sitting 6 inches to her left, Emily saw Henry Collins understand for the first time exactly what kind of problem she was. Not the girl he'd gestured at dismissively on William's ranch 3 weeks ago. Not the fat woman from nowhere. The person who had just walked into his meeting with documentation he hadn't known existed, cited territorial statute from memory, and handed judges copies to the 3 board members he didn't own. She watched him recalculate. She did not look away. It was Collins who broke the gaze. He turned to address the room with the composure of a man who has practiced composure all his life and is currently holding it together by main force. "We'll table this discussion pending review of the court filing," he said. "The meeting is adjourned." He walked out without looking at William and without looking at Emily again. The room exhaled. William was very still beside her. She turned to look at him and found him looking at her with an expression that was not any of the ones she had catalogued before. It was something she didn't have a name for yet. Margaret Yates appeared at Emily's elbow. "That was well done," she said low and direct. "Very well done." "Thank you, ma'am," Emily said. Yates looked at William. "You'd better hold on to her," she said. William said, "Working on it." Emily did not look at him when he said that. She looked at her satchel and carefully put away the remaining copies of the documentation. She was aware that her hands were not entirely steady, and she was hoping nobody else was. The walk back to the wagon was through a room full of people who parted to let them through, and not one of them said a word. And the silence was entirely different from the silence she'd walked through when she first came to this town. This one had respect in it. Or something close enough to feel like it. They didn't speak for the first mile of the ride back. William drove. Emily sat beside him on the wagon bench with her satchel on her lap, and the night air coming down cool after the afternoon storm, and the stars doing what Wyoming stars did, which was refuse to be anything but enormous. Finally, William said, "You planned that. The copies. The statute." "Yes," Emily said. "You knew he was going to try to execute the instruments tonight." "I thought it was likely," she said. "He's a man who moves fast when he feels threatened. We threatened him by filing. I wanted to be ready." "You memorized the territorial statute." "I read it on the ride to Casper," Emily said. "I have a good memory for things I need." William was quiet for a moment. "Emily," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She registered it. She kept her eyes forward. "Yes," she said. "What Collins said about you when you first came to the ranch," William said. "What the women in town have said. What every person in Harlow Creek has implied about whether you belong here." He paused. "I need you to know I see none of that." She breathed. "I know," she said, quietly. "I don't think you fully do," he said. "Because if you did, you wouldn't look the way you look sometimes when someone says something. Like you're bracing for it." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the road. His hands on the reins were steady. He said things the way he did everything else, direct, complete, no excess. "The world was wrong about you," he said. "Every person who looked at you and decided what you were worth in the first 3 seconds they were wrong. And I knew it 3 days in, probably before that." He glanced at her. "I just didn't know how to say it until now." Emily looked at the road ahead. There was a thickness in her throat. She managed it. "You're saying it now," she said. "I am." The wagon moved through the Wyoming dark, and the stars watched from above, and somewhere ahead the lights of the Dawson Ranch were coming into view, that solid plain house that a man's father had built 40 years ago, that had weathered everything, and was going to weather this too. "Thank you," Emily said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. William said nothing more, but he moved just slightly, and the space between them on the wagon bench, which had always been the careful professional foot, and a half of two people respecting boundaries, was half an inch less than it had been. Emily noticed. She did not move away. They rode the rest of the way home in a silence that had something warm in it. And when they pulled up to the ranch, and Ruth appeared at the door with a lantern, and the expression of a woman who had been awake and worried, and was not going to admit to either, Emily stepped down from the wagon and looked up at the Dawson house and thought home. She did not say it, but she thought it, and she understood finally and fully that she was in trouble of the best possible kind, and that the only question left was whether William Dawson was in the same trouble, and whether either of them was going to be brave enough to say so out loud. She went inside. The night settled around the ranch like a hand closing gently. And Collins, wherever he was, had not won tonight. But he was not done either. And Emily Carter, who had walked 3 weeks across Wyoming with her dead father's ledger in her bag, and nothing else, understood that the fight was not over. It had just changed shape. Collins didn't wait long to hit back. 3 days after the town hall meeting, William found a notice nailed to the ranch gate. Not delivered by hand. Not sent through the lending office. Nailed to the wood in the night by someone who hadn't wanted to be seen doing it. Emily read it over William's shoulder. It was a formal demand from the Harlow Creek Livestock Association, an organization she had not heard mentioned once in her 3 weeks on the ranch, citing concerns about the Dawson herd's compliance with new territory grazing regulations. The notice required a full inspection of all cattle within 7 days. Failure to comply would result in a fine and potential forced relocation of the herd. "Is this real?" Emily asked. "The Livestock Association." "It's real," William said. "Collins founded it 4 years ago. He's the chairman." He pulled the notice off the gate. "The regulations it's citing don't exist. He wrote that language last night and put it on paper with the association seal." "Can he do that?" "He just did," William said. Emily took the notice from him and read it again, slowly. The way she read everything when she was looking for the thing underneath the thing. "He's not trying to win this one," she said. "He's trying to occupy your time. A cattle inspection requires you to gather the full herd. That's 2-3 days of work with your current hands. While you're doing that, you're not building the court case. You're not talking to Ellison or Yates. You're just occupied." William looked at her. "He's buying time," he said. "He's buying time," Emily confirmed. "Which means something is happening on his end that he needs time for. Something we don't know about yet." That was the part that stayed with Emily through the rest of that morning and into the afternoon. Not the inspection notice itself. What it meant that Collins needed a week of their attention diverted. She thought about it while she worked. She ran it through her head the way her father had taught her to run problems, not attacking it directly, but walking around the outside of it, looking at the shape from different angles, waiting for the thing that didn't fit to show itself. By evening, she thought she had it. She found William in the barn. "The territorial court filing," she said. "Collins knows we filed. He knows the judge is doing expedited review. If the judge finds preliminary merit, which I think he will, the documentation is solid, then Collins loses the ability to execute the financial instruments while the case is pending. He needs to move on the instruments before that ruling comes down." William was very still. "The ruling could come any day," he said. "Yes, and he can't control when it comes. But if he can occupy us with this inspection for a week, he uses that week to find a different instrument," William said. His voice had gone quiet, the particular quiet she'd learned to recognize as controlled fury. Something that isn't tied to the note, something the court ruling doesn't cover. "What else does he hold?" Emily said. "What else has he got that touches this ranch?" William was quiet for a long moment. His jaw was set, and his eyes were somewhere past the barn wall, running through 12 years of accumulated dealings with Henry Collins and everyone Collins had ever worked through. "The road," he said. Emily waited. "The access road to the north pasture," William said slowly. "It crosses a strip of land that my father sold to Harlow Creek Township 20 years ago. Township road easement. We've always had free passage." He looked at her. "Collins put 3 men on the town council in the last election. If the township revokes the easement, you lose access to the north pasture," Emily said. 200 head of cattle with nowhere to graze," William said. "In high summer." The number sat between them like a stone dropped in still water. "How fast can he move the council?" Emily said. "Special session," William said. "He calls a special session. He can have a vote in 48 hours. Emily did the math. 7 days for the inspection distraction. 48 hours for the council vote once he called it. The court ruling could come any time in the next 10 to 30 days. Collins was going to call the council session this week during the inspection while they were occupied. "We need to split up," Emily said. "You handle the inspection you have to it's your herd. I'll monitor the town council. If Collins calls a special session, I need to know the moment it's posted." "You can't stop a council vote," William said. "No," Emily said. "But I can make sure the right people know what's behind it before it happens. Ellison has standing in this town. Yates does too. If Collins is using the township council to attack your land access while a fraud complaint is pending, that is itself a legal problem." She paused. "I need to talk to Margaret Yates." William looked at her for a long moment. "Emily," he said. "I know," she said. "I know it's a lot. I know I'm—" She stopped herself, restarted. "Tell me if I'm overstepping." "You're not overstepping," he said. The words came out immediate and certain, like they'd been waiting. "That's not what I was going to say." She looked at him. "I was going to say, be careful," he said. "Collins has been pleasant to your face every time. He won't be going forward. You've become a real problem to him, and he knows it." Emily nodded. "I know," she said. "I'll be careful." She went to see Margaret Yates the next morning. Margaret Yates lived in a well-kept house on the east side of Harlow Creek, and she answered the door before Emily had finished knocking, which suggested she had been expecting someone and possibly had been watching the street. "Miss Carter," she said, "come in." Inside the house was the kind of organized that spoke of a mind that needed things in their place. Yates sat across from Emily with coffee between them and listened to everything Emily laid out Collins's probable play with the township easement. The timing relative to the court filing the inspection notice, as distraction with the focused attention of a woman who had been navigating male power structures for decades and knew exactly what she was looking at. When Emily finished, Yates was quiet for a moment. "How do you know all this?" she said. "I grew up watching my father navigate a smaller version of the same situation," Emily said. "Different man, same playbook." "And what happened to your father?" Emily looked at her. "He lost." Yates absorbed that. "What do you need from me?" Yates said. "If Collins calls a special council session," Emily said, "I need you to know about it before he does anything with it. And I need to know if there's anyone on that council who can be reached who isn't fully in Collins' pocket." "Daniel Hart," Yates said. "Second term. He's a Collins man on the surface, but he's been uncomfortable with the last 2 votes Collins pushed through. His brother-in-law ranches 20 miles north of Dawson." She looked at Emily directly. "If you could show Daniel Hart what Collins is doing to Dawson land, and make him understand it could happen to his brother-in-law's land next." "He'd think twice," Emily said. "He might do more than think," Yates said. "Daniel Hart doesn't want to be the man who let Collins take the county. He just hasn't found a moment where it cost him enough to act." She paused. "You might be giving him that moment." Emily thought about that on the walk back to the ranch. About the particular calculus of good people who didn't do good things yet, not because they were bad, but because the cost of acting hadn't exceeded the comfort of waiting, and about how sometimes a single piece of information delivered at the right moment could tip that scale. She had the information. She needed the moment. She didn't have to wait long for it. Collins called the special council session on the 4th day of the cattle inspection. Tom Briggs brought the news. The posting had gone up on the town notice board at 8 in the morning. Special session Thursday evening. Agenda review of existing township road easements. Emily read the posting and handed it back to Tom and said, "Thank you," in a voice that was calm, because she had expected this and had been ready for it since the morning she'd talked to Margaret Yates. She went to find Daniel Hart. He was at the feed supply. She'd asked Chester Moore where to find him without explaining why, and Moore had told her without asking, which was its own small piece of information about which way Chester Moore was leaning. Hart was a broad man in his 40s, with a careful face, and the hands of someone who'd done real work before he'd entered civic life. He was loading supplies into a wagon when Emily came up beside him. "Mr. Hart," she said. He looked at her. She watched him recognize her, the Dawson woman. That was how they thought of her in town. She knew that, and she watched him decide not to walk away. "Miss Carter," he said. "I need 5 minutes of your time," she said. "After that, you can do whatever you were going to do, and I won't bother you again." He looked at her for a moment. Then he set down the sack he was holding. "5 minutes," he said. She gave him 4. She laid it out clean and fast, the berm, the court filing the inspection notice as distraction, and now the easement session. She did not editorialize. She did not tell him what to think. She set the facts in front of him the way her father had taught her in sequence, and let them be what they were. Then she said, "Your brother-in-law ranches the Crest property north of Dawson." Hart's expression shifted. "His access road crosses 2 township easements," Emily said. both of them granted under the same ordinance as the Dawson easement. If Collins gets the council to establish that existing easements can be revoked by special session vote, those two easements become vulnerable the next time Collins decides he wants the crest land. Hart was very still. "You're saying this doesn't stop with Dawson," he said. "It never stops with one ranch," Emily said. "That's the whole point. You take one, you set the precedent, you take the next one cheaper and faster." She stopped there. She had given him 4 minutes. She had said what needed to be said. "I appreciate your time, Mr. Hart," she said. She walked back to the ranch. The special session was set for 7 on Thursday. At 6:30, Emily was in the town hall again. This time, the room felt different before anything had happened. The particular charge in the air of a place where people have arrived already knowing that something is going to happen and have divided themselves without quite admitting it into sides. Collins arrived at 5 minutes to 7 with 2 council members flanking him and the satisfied pre-victory expression of a man who has counted his votes and found the number sufficient. He saw Emily and William in the 3rd row. His expression recalibrated. William leaned toward Emily. Low. "Hart's not here yet." "He'll be here," Emily said. She believed it. She had to believe it. At 2 minutes past 7, Daniel Hart came through the door. He sat on the opposite side of the room from Collins. Collins saw it. Emily watched Collins see it. Watched him count again quickly and find the number had changed. The session chairman called order. Collins presented the easement review in the same reasonable, reluctant civic duty voice he used for everything. Existing easements were administrative instruments subject to regular review. Township resources required that access accommodations be evaluated for ongoing necessity and appropriateness. The Dawson Road easement had not been formally reviewed in 20 years. It was simply good governance. To Daniel Hart stood up. "Point of order," he said. Collins stopped. "Under what authority does a special session convene to review individual easements?" Hart said. "The Township Code requires a full council session for any modification of existing property access instruments. 7 members, minimum 5 present. We have 6 in the room." Collins said, "The special session authority derives from—" "I've read the Township Code," Hart said. "The special session authority covers emergency measures and budget modifications. Easement review requires full session." He looked at the chairman, not Collins. "I'd like the chairman to confirm that this session does not have the authority to vote on easement modification." The chairman was a thin man named Gerald, who had the look of someone who had agreed to run meetings without fully understanding what he was agreeing to. He opened the Township Code book that was on the table in front of him. He turned pages. He read. The room was absolutely silent. "Mr. Hart is correct," Gerald said. "Special session does not carry authority for easement modification. That requires full council." Collins said, "Gerald." "That's the code, Henry," Gerald said. He sounded almost apologetic. Collins turned to address the room. He was holding the composure together, but it was visible now, the holding the effort of it. "We can schedule a full council session, which requires 14 days' notice posted on the public board," Hart said, "under standard council procedure. Unless you're going to tell me that's changed too." 14 days. The court ruling would be back before then. And if the ruling found preliminary merit on the fraud complaint, Collins couldn't touch any of it. The room knew it. Emily could feel the moment it shifted the collective silent understanding of 40 people watching a powerful man run out of road. Collins looked at Emily. She looked back at him. "This session is adjourned," the chairman said. "Full council session to be scheduled per standard procedure." Collins walked out. He walked past William and Emily on the way to the door, and he did not look at either of them. And that itself was the most significant thing he had done all evening, because Collins was a man who looked at everything and everyone as a way of maintaining authority over a room. Choosing not to look was an admission. Outside the hall in the warm Wyoming evening, Margaret Yates appeared at Emily's elbow. That, Yates said, was Daniel Hart doing the first right thing he's done in 2 years. "He did it because it was right," Emily said, "and because it was also good for his family. Those 2 things don't always line up so neatly." No, Yates said. They don't. She looked at Emily with an expression that was something between assessment and warmth. You gave him the argument and trusted him to use it. That's harder than making the argument yourself. Emily thought about that. My father used to say that the most useful thing you can do in a fight, she said, is figure out who else has a reason to be in it and hand them a weapon. Yates smiled. Smart man. He was, Emily said. William had been talking to Hart across the room. He came back to Emily now, and Hart came with him, and the two men shook hands with the directness of ranchers who had reached an understanding, and Hart gave Emily a nod that meant more than the nod itself. Then he left, and it was just William and Emily walking back to the wagon for the second time in a week, leaving a Harlow Creek meeting having survived Henry Collins. The ruling has to come soon, William said. It will, Emily said. And when it does? When it does? Emily said Collins' entire legal strategy collapses. He can't touch the note while the fraud complaint is active. He can't touch the easement for 14 days minimum, and by then the ruling will be in. The inspection was a distraction, and we didn't let it distract us. She paused. He's got nothing left. Don't say that, William said. Men like Collins always have something left. Emily looked at him. He was right. She knew he was right. Then we stay ready, she said. They drove back to the ranch. This time the silence between them on the wagon bench was not the working silence, or the comfortable silence, or even the silence after something had been won. It was the silence of two people who know. The immediate crisis has passed and are now alone with the thing that has been growing between them for 3 weeks without either of them naming it. Emily was aware of it. She had been aware of it since the barn, since his jacket, since the wagon ride home from the town hall meeting, and the half-inch of narrowed distance. She looked at her hands on her lap. William cleared his throat. I need to say something, he said. Emily waited. When you came to the gate 3 weeks ago, he said, I almost sent you back. I know, she said. Not because of Collins, he said. Not because of what anyone was going to say, because I didn't want... He stopped, started again. I've been alone a long time. I've got the ranch running the way I want it, the way my father built it, and I've gotten used to the quiet and to things being in their place and to not having to... He paused. To not having to feel anything I didn't put there on purpose. Emily breathed. And then you walked up my drive, he said, and told me you'd work harder than anyone expected. And I believed you. I believed you in about 30 seconds. He was looking at the road. And that scared me more than Collins ever has. Emily looked at him. He was not the kind of man who said things like this. She understood the cost of it, the years of self-containment it was going up against the practiced silence he was overriding. She understood what it meant that he was overriding it. William, she said. His name for the first time. She watched him register it. I'm not good at this, he said. I don't have the words. You're doing fine, she said. He finally looked at her. The gray eyes which she had once thought were cold, which she now understood were simply deep, the kind of eyes that held things rather than showing them. I don't want you to leave, he said. When this is over, when Collins is finished and the court is done, and there's nothing left to fight, I don't want you to leave. The wagon moved through the dark and the stars watched. Emily sat with those words and let them settle into her, the way water settles into dry ground, slowly, completely finding every crack and filling it. She had rationed hope for 4 months. She had survived on careful amounts of it, measured out precisely never enough to make the next disappointment fatal. She was done rationing. I'm not planning to leave, she said. The hands on the reins tightened slightly. The only way he showed things small, controlled, real. Good, he said. They rode the rest of the way in a silence that was nothing like any of the silences that had come before it. The court ruling arrived on a Tuesday. It came by telegram to the Casper Courier office and was brought to the ranch by the same boy who had brought Collins notice 3 weeks earlier. Except this time the boy seemed more nervous and handed the envelope to Emily, who happened to be closest to the gate, before anyone else got to it. She read it standing in the yard. Her hands were steady, steadier than she expected. She walked to the barn. William looked up. She held out the telegram. He read it. His face was entirely still while he read it. When he finished, he read it again. Then he lowered it and stood there for a moment with the paper in his hand. The territorial court had found preliminary merit on the water rights fraud complaint. An injunction was granted against execution of any financial instruments held against the Dawson property, pending full hearing. Collins was required to respond to the complaint within 30 days. The secondary tax claim was flagged for separate review under potential fraud statutes. It was not the end. Emily knew it was not the end. There would be a full hearing and lawyers and more paper. And Collins was not a man who would simply accept a preliminary ruling and walk away. But the instruments were frozen. The note was frozen. The land was safe for now, and now was what mattered. "It worked," William said, not loud, just the words standing in the barn holding the telegram. "It worked," Emily said. He looked at her. Something broke open in his face. Not dramatically, he was not a dramatic man, but in the way of something that has been held under pressure for a very long time, and has finally been given permission to release. A breath that was almost a laugh, the lines around his eyes moving. And then, because he was William Dawson, and he did not do things by halves, once he had decided to do them, he crossed the barn in 3 strides, and he put his arms around her. Emily stood absolutely still for 1 second of pure surprise. Then she put her arms around him too. He was solid and warm, and he held on with the kind of certainty that had nothing to do with romance, and everything to do with 2 people who have fought something hard together and come out the other side. He held on the way you hold something you were afraid of losing. Emily pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed. They stood like that in the middle of the barn for a long moment, and neither of them said anything, and it was enough. It was more than enough. When they stepped back from each other, he kept his hands on her shoulders. He looked at her. "You saved this land," he said. "We saved it," she said. "Emily." His voice was rough. "You walked 3 weeks across Wyoming with your father's notes in a bag, and you walked into my fight like it was yours from the beginning." He shook his head slowly. "I don't know how to—" "You don't have to," she said. "You gave me a job when nobody else would. You said she stays in front of 20 people who thought you were making a mistake." She looked at him steadily. "We're even." His hands were still on her shoulders. "We're not even," he said. "Not by a long way." She looked at him. He looked at her. And there was a moment, a long, clear, certain moment, where what had been building for 3 weeks was simply present between them, no longer something to manage or ration or keep carefully on the other side of a professional distance. "William," she said. "Yeah," he said, like he already knew what she was going to say and was just confirming he was ready to hear it. "I would very much like to stay," she said. The hands on her shoulders tightened. "Then stay," he said. Outside, Ruth appeared in the barn doorway, took one look at the 2 of them, made a sound that was entirely satisfied, and turned around and went back to the kitchen to start making something that warranted celebration. Emily heard her go and laughed, really laughed, the kind that surprised her, the kind she hadn't expected, and William's face broke into something she hadn't seen on it before, and it was extraordinary, that smile, quiet and real, and entirely worth the 3 weeks it had taken to earn it. Collins was not finished. They both knew that. There would be a hearing and lawyers, and the long, slow work of territorial law grinding toward justice. But tonight in this barn, on this land that his father had built and that they had held together, tonight was theirs. And Emily Carter, who had walked into this county with nothing but a name nobody wanted to hire, and a dead man's ledger, and the refusal to prove anyone right about her, was exactly where she was supposed to be. The injunction held. For 11 days after the telegram arrived, Harlow Creek watched and waited, and conducted the particular social experiment of a small town, recalibrating its understanding of who had power and who didn't. Collins was still in Harlow Creek. He still owned the lending office and the livestock association and 3 votes on the town council. He still tipped his hat to people on the boardwalk and spoke at the Methodist church, and conducted himself as a man who had encountered a temporary setback and was entirely untroubled by it. But people watched him differently now. Emily felt it every time she came into town. The watching had shifted, not from her to him exactly, but it had redistributed itself, spread more evenly, become less certain about who it was safe to dismiss. Mrs. Patton still crossed to the other side of the street. But two women Emily had never spoken to nodded at her now when she passed the dry goods store. Chester Moore at the feed supply started having her order ready before she asked. Small things. The kind of things that meant nothing individually and everything collectively. William noticed it too. "Town's changing its mind about you," he said one morning over breakfast, Ruth pouring coffee with the studied casualness of a woman pretending not to listen. "Town's changing its mind about whether I'm going to be here long enough to matter," Emily said. William looked at her across the table. "Are you?" he said. Ruth set the coffee pot down with a small deliberate sound and left the kitchen. Emily looked at William. He was looking at her with that direct, undecorated attention she had come to understand was how he said the things he didn't say out loud. He had told her 11 days ago that he didn't want her to leave. She had told him she wasn't planning to. And since then, they had existed in the particular charged patience of two people who have said something true and are waiting to see what truth requires of them next. "I'm here," she said, simply. He nodded, once. His version of volumes. She drank her coffee. But the question she hadn't asked aloud was the same one she had been not asking for 11 days. What did here mean exactly in the long run? She was still technically a hired ranch hand. She had a room in the bunkhouse. She worked for $12 a month. Those were the facts as they existed on paper, and she was a woman who had learned to pay close attention to what existed on paper, because paper was what happened when the comfortable understandings broke down. She did not want to assume. She had learned the cost of assuming, so she worked. She managed the South Pasture water restoration, a slow, methodical process of redirecting flow back through the channels that Collins Berm had starved, monitoring the grass recovery, tracking the cattle weight, with the same obsessive documentation her father had taught her. She walked fence lines and kept records, and had 3 conversations with Tom Briggs about the North Pasture rotation that resulted in a schedule change that William approved without modification. She did not assume. She worked. She waited. She was good at waiting. What she was less good at was what happened on the 12th evening. Collins made his next move on a Wednesday. Not a legal move, not a financial one. Something Emily had not fully anticipated, which told her she had underestimated him in at least one direction. He went to the territorial newspaper. The Casper Weekly Territorial ran a piece on Friday morning. Emily found out about it when Daniel Hart rode out to the ranch specifically to bring them a copy, which told her how seriously he was taking it, because Daniel Hart did not make social calls. The article was written by a journalist named Fowler, whose work Emily did not know. It was framed as a human interest piece, a concerned look at the situation in Harlow Creek, where a controversial court filing had created tension between established community members and what the piece called newcomers with unclear motives and uncertain backgrounds. Emily Carter was not named. The piece was careful about that, but it described in terms that made her immediately identifiable to anyone in the county, a woman of notable physical presence who had arrived in Harlow Creek with questionable documentation and had inserted herself into a legal dispute, raising concerns among community members about outside interference in local property matters. Her father's ledger was described as reportedly homemade records of dubious provenance. She read the article twice. Then she set it on the kitchen table and stood at the window with her back to the room for a moment. Ruth, who had read it over Emily's shoulder, said something in a low voice that was technically inappropriate for a woman of her generation and character, and which Emily found, despite everything, almost made her laugh. William came in from the barn. He read it standing at the table. Emily watched his back while he read. When he turned around, his face was doing the controlled fury thing, the lid-on thing. "He can't fight us in court, so he's fighting us in print," William said. "He's not fighting us," Emily said. "He's fighting me. specifically. He wants to discredit the documentation before the hearing. If he can establish in public opinion that my father's records are unreliable, that I'm an outsider with unclear motives, then even if we win the legal case, we win it with a question mark attached. Dubious provenance, William said, and the way he said it made it clear he found the phrase personally offensive. The ledger is legitimate, Emily said. My father kept it for 20 years. Every measurement, every notation, every legal reference, it's accurate and it's real. She paused. But accuracy doesn't matter if people have already decided what they believe. Then we correct it, William said. How? He was quiet for a moment. Then you talk to Fowler. Emily looked at him. The journalist who wrote this. You give him the real story, William said. You put the ledger in front of him. You let him see your father's handwriting, the dates, the 20 years of careful work. You give him something better than what Collins gave him. He paused. Collins got to him first because we weren't paying attention in that direction. We correct it. Emily considered this. It was not wrong. It was also terrifying in a way that the town hall and the creditors' meeting had not been, because those had been about facts and law, which she knew how to handle. This was about letting someone look at her life, at her father's life, at the whole story of how she'd ended up here, and make a judgment about whether it was worth printing. He might not be interested, she said. He wrote the piece Collins gave him because Collins gave him a story, William said. Give him a better story. She looked at him. You think my story is better, she said. And she heard it as she said it, the small, still present part of her that had been told so many times that she was not enough that it had started to believe it. William heard it too. She could tell by the way he stopped and looked at her directly. A woman who walked 3 weeks across Wyoming after losing everything, he said, carrying her dead father's notes, who found water fraud that's been bleeding this county dry for 5 years, and documented it well enough to get a territorial court injunction in 8 days. He did not look away from her. Yes, I think that story is better. Emily breathed. All right, she said. I'll go to Casper. She went alone. William offered to come. She told him she needed to do this part herself, and he accepted that the way he accepted most things she told him, without requiring a longer explanation than the one she gave. James Fowler worked out of a small office above the print shop on Casper's main street. He was a younger man than she'd expected, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and the alert, watchful eyes of someone whose job was to pay attention to things. He recognized her the moment she walked in. She could see it, the recalibration, the piece he'd written running through his head against the woman standing in front of him. Miss Carter, he said. Mr. Fowler, she said. I'd like to give you a better story than the one you printed. He looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled out a chair. Sit down, he said. She sat. She put her father's ledger on the desk between them. She told him everything from the fire, to Cheyenne, to the 6 ranches that wouldn't look at her, to the advertisement in the Gazette, to the berm in the creek. She did not perform it. She did not make it dramatic. She told it the way her father had taught her, to document things in sequence with evidence complete. Fowler listened. He looked at the ledger. He asked 3 precise questions about the dating of specific entries, about the methodology her father had used for water flow measurement, about the 1879 Cheyenne precedent she had referenced in the court filing. She answered all 3. He picked up his pencil. The man who briefed me on this story, Fowler said, without looking up from his notes, was specific about certain details. The unclear motives. The questionable documentation. He had a particular characterization ready for every element. I know who briefed you, Emily said. Yes. Fowler looked up. I should have asked more questions before I printed it. He said it plainly without excessive apology. I'll ask them now if you're willing. That's why I'm here, Emily said. They talked for 2 hours. When she stood to leave, Fowler stood too. He held the door. Miss Carter, he said, For what it's worth, the piece I print next week will be considerably different from the one I printed this week." "I don't need it to be flattering," Emily said. "I need it to be accurate." "Those aren't always the same thing," he said. "In this case, I think they might be." She rode back to Harlow Creek. She did not tell William how the conversation had gone. She told him it had gone well, which was true, and she told him it was handled, which was also true, and she did not tell him that she had sat in Fowler's office and talked about her father for 2 hours, and had cried exactly once briefly when she described the kitchen garden that had burned with everything else, and that Fowler had not commented on it and had simply waited, and then continued asking questions, which was the most professional and somehow most decent thing anyone had done for her in months. She told Ruth about the kitchen garden that night, sitting in the kitchen after dinner. Ruth listened with her hands around her coffee cup and her eyes steady, and did not say anything for a long moment after Emily finished. Then she said, "Your father built something that outlasted him. He built it in you." Emily pressed her lips together. "I know," she said. "I just miss him." "Course you do," Ruth said. "Grief doesn't have a schedule." She put her hand over Emily's on the table. Solid. Real. "But he'd be proud of what you did with what he left you." Emily nodded. She did not trust her voice right then. She went to bed and lay in the bunkhouse dark, and thought about the kitchen garden and the ledger and the 3 weeks of walking and all the things you carry when you have nothing left to carry them in except yourself. She slept. Fowler's second piece ran the following Friday. The headline was, "Wyoming Woman's Documentation May Unravel. Years of Water Rights Abuse in Johnson County." Emily read it at the kitchen table. Ruth read it over her shoulder. William read it after them both, standing against the counter with his first coffee of the morning, and when he finished he set the paper down and looked at Emily with an expression she had learned over the past weeks meant he was choosing words carefully. "How does it feel?" he said. She thought about it. "Strange," she said, "like it's about someone else. Someone braver than I actually felt." "You were exactly that brave," he said. "You just didn't notice it while it was happening." She looked at him. He looked back. Ruth picked up the paper and said she was going to put it somewhere safe and left them alone in the kitchen, which was becoming something of a habit. "The hearing is in 3 weeks, William said. "I know. Colin's attorney filed a response yesterday," William said. "Margaret Yates told me last night. He's contesting the water flow methodology. Says our measurements were taken improperly." Emily set her coffee down. "On what grounds?" she said. "He's claiming the survey we used as a baseline was outdated," William said. "That creek surveys need to be conducted by a licensed territorial surveyor to be admissible." Emily was quiet for 3 seconds. "Was your father's original survey conducted by a licensed surveyor?" she said. "Yes," William said. "James Alderman. He's been dead 15 years. "But his license would have been recorded with the Territorial Land Office," Emily said. "Presumably. And a licensed survey properly recorded establishes the legal baseline for all subsequent measurements," Emily said. "Our measurements don't need to be surveyor certified independently. They need to be verifiable against the certified baseline, which they are." William was looking at her. "How do you know that?" he said. "My father fought this exact argument in 1879, Emily said. "He lost because he couldn't produce the original surveyor's record. We can produce yours." She was already on her feet. "I need to write to the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne today." She was at the desk in the corner of the kitchen before William had finished his coffee. He watched her write. After a moment, he said quietly to her back, "Emily." She kept writing. "Yes. I was thinking," he said. He stopped. She turned. He was standing by the kitchen counter, and he had the particular look of a man who has rehearsed something and is now finding that the rehearsal doesn't quite fit the actual moment. "I was thinking," he said again, "that $12 a month is not a reasonable wage for someone who has saved my land 3 times in the past 4 weeks. She looked at him. That's what you were thinking, she said. Among other things, he said. She waited. He crossed the kitchen. He stopped 2 feet from her. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her across the wagon bench in the Wyoming dark, the way he'd looked at her in the barn after the telegram arrived, that deep, certain, undecorated attention. I'd like you to be a partner here, he said. Not an employee, not a hand, a partner, with everything that means. He held her gaze. And I'd like to ask you properly when this is finished. When Collins is done, and the court is settled, and this land is clear. He paused. But I wanted you to know what I'm intending, so you're not surprised. Emily looked at him for a long moment. William Dawson, she said. Are you telling me your intentions 6 weeks after I arrived at your gate asking for ranch work? I am, he said, steady, not embarrassed. She looked at his face, at the gray eyes and the lines earned from years of Wyoming weather, and the jaw that was not given to easy softening, and was not soft now, just honest. All right, she said. All right, he said. All right, she said. I'll expect you to ask properly. Something happened in his face. The quiet smile, the real one. Yes, ma'am, he said. She turned back to the letter. But she was smiling too, and she let herself because there was nobody watching except possibly Ruth through the kitchen door, and Ruth was going to know about it regardless. Chang. The letter to the Territorial Land Office came back in 8 days. James Alderman's survey of the Dawson Creek property conducted in 1861 was on record. The Land Office enclosed a certified copy. The methodology was standard territorial survey practice. The baseline was legally established and admissible. Collins' attorney had one argument: it had just been removed. Emily brought the certified copy to William in the south pasture, where he was checking on the cattle that were slowly and visibly recovering as the water flow normalized. The grass was not back to full health yet. It would take another season for that. But the cattle were drinking, and the weight was stabilizing, and the land was doing what the land did when it was given back its water. William read the copy. He looked up at the sky for a moment. It's over, he said. The hearing is still in 2 weeks, Emily said. It's over, he said again, not wishful, just certain. The voice of a man who has spent 12 years learning to read what the land was telling him, and applied it now to the situation in front of him. Emily looked at the south pasture, at the cattle, at the grass coming back. Your father would have fixed this too, she said, if he'd known. He would have, William said. He was stubborn as the land itself. He was quiet for a moment. He would have liked you. Emily looked at the ground. I hope so, she said. He would have, William said. He had a particular respect for people who didn't stop when they were supposed to. She looked up at him. He was already looking at her. The hearing was held in Casper on a Thursday in late August. The territorial courtroom was small and smelled like old wood and authority, and Emily sat at the table beside William and the attorney. Margaret Yates had recommended a careful man named Sutherland who had been practicing territorial law for 20 years and had read Emily's documentation with the expression of someone encountering something considerably better than he'd expected. Collins was at the opposite table with 2 attorneys. He was dressed well and composed and gave nothing away, and Emily respected the discipline of it even as she sat across from it and waited. The hearing took 4 hours. Sutherland presented the documentation, the certified survey baseline, the water flow measurements, the constructed versus natural diversion analysis, the timeline that placed the berm's construction in the specific window when Collins' land records showed irrigation improvements. Collins' attorneys contested the flow methodology. Sutherland produced the Alderman survey. They contested Emily's qualifications to conduct measurements. Sutherland pointed out that the measurements had been taken in accordance with the methodology established by the certified survey and cross-referenced against 2 independent water tables from the territorial record. They contested the timeline. Sutherland produced Collins's own irrigation records obtained through the court discovery process, which showed construction activity on the creek upstream in the precise window Emily's grass analysis had identified. Collins's own records. Emily had thought about that moment when she'd first seen the discovery documents, the specific, almost mathematical satisfaction of a man's own paperwork becoming the evidence against him. Her father would have appreciated it. He'd always said that careful people left a trail, and careless people left a different kind of trail, and both of them would find you eventually. The judge deliberated for 2 days. The ruling arrived on a Saturday morning. Sutherland brought it to the ranch himself, which told Emily everything about the ruling before she opened it. Fraud found. The berm was a constructed interference with established water rights. The secondary tax claim was vacated as predicated on falsified conditions. The note on the south pasture fence repairs was restructured with Collins required to return interest paid during the period of active fraud. And one more thing. Collins was required to dismantle the berm and restore the creek to its natural course within 30 days under territorial supervision. Failure to comply would result in criminal referral. William read it standing in the yard. Tom Briggs was nearby. Ruth was on the porch. Sutherland stood with his hat in his hands. William finished reading. He lowered the document. He looked at Emily. She looked at him. And the thing that had held itself carefully at a distance for 8 weeks through inspections and town halls and creditors' meetings and long wagon rides through the Wyoming dark was simply there between them, plain and complete, and requiring nothing more from either of them than to acknowledge it. Tom Briggs cleared his throat and announced he was going to check on the north fence, and departed with the diplomatic efficiency of a man who had worked for William Dawson long enough to understand when he was not needed. Ruth went inside. Sutherland said he would send the formal copies and made it to his horse in a remarkable amount of time for a man of his years. And William and Emily were alone in the yard of the ranch his father had built with the Wyoming summer pressing warm around them and the south pasture cattle grazing on recovering grass a quarter-mile away. "It's over," Emily said. "It's over," William said. He crossed the yard to her. He stopped closer than the professional 1.5 feet they had kept for 8 weeks, closer than the careful distances and the managed silences. "I said I'd ask properly when it was finished," he said. She looked up at him. "You did say that." "It's finished," he said. "It is," she said. He took her hand, both of them. He held them in his like a man holding something he intends to keep and knows the value of. "Emily Carter," he said. His voice was rough and certain, and completely his own. "You walked into my gate 8 weeks ago with holes in your boots and your father's notes in your bag and more determination than any person I have ever met. You saved this land. You saved it better than I could have saved it alone." He looked at her. "I would very much like to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to walk 3 weeks to find somewhere you belong again. Because you belong here. You've belonged here since the 3rd morning, and I was too slow to say it, and I'm saying it now." He paused. "Will you marry me?" Emily looked at their joined hands. She thought about the fire, the 6 ranches, the 3 weeks of walking, the gate she had pushed open with both hands, the $12 a month and the bunkhouse at the end of the row, the ledger, her father's kitchen garden, the things you carry when you have nothing left to carry them in. She thought about a man who had said she stays in front of 20 people who thought he was making a mistake. She looked up. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." He laughed. It was the second time she'd heard him laugh, the real one. Not the dry, near laugh, but the actual thing, and it was as it had been the first time, completely extraordinary. It changed his whole face, made him younger and older simultaneously in the way that genuine joy does to a person who doesn't perform it often. He pulled her close. She went. They stood in the yard of the Dawson Ranch in the Wyoming August sun, and it was not graceful or performed or particularly cinematic. It was just 2 people holding on to each other in a place where they both finally understood they were allowed to stay. They married in October. Not a large ceremony. Emily had no family to invite, and William had a cousin in Denver who couldn't travel, and neither of them were people who needed an audience for the things that mattered most. Ruth organized it because Ruth organized everything, and Margaret Yates stood witness, and Daniel Hart brought his wife and shook William's hand for a long time, and even Chester Moore showed up, which nobody had expected. The ceremony was in the yard of the ranch. Emily wore a dress Ruth had made from fabric the two of them had chosen together over 3 afternoons of what Ruth called practical discussion, and Emily recognized as something closer to joy. It was a deep blue, the color of the Wyoming sky in the hour before full dark, and it fit her exactly as she was. Without apology, without attempting to make her something other than herself. She carried nothing except a small piece of her father's ledger, a single page she had folded and put in her pocket. The first page he'd ever written in it from 25 years ago, in the careful handwriting she knew better than her own. A record of the first day he'd gotten the farm's water right. Creek flow restored, land responding. Everything takes time and patience and faith that the work means something. William said his vows in the same voice he used for everything, low and direct, and meaning exactly what he said. Emily said hers, and did not cry, which she was proud of, until Ruth cried, at which point all bets were off. After standing in the yard with the people who had come to witness it, Emily looked around at the ranch, at the barn, at the house, at the recovering south pasture, at the fence lines. Tom Briggs kept straight, and felt something she had not let herself feel in a very long time. Not relief. Not safety, exactly, though that was part of it. Something older and simpler. She felt like she had come home, not to a place. Not to a house or a piece of land, though those things were real and present, and hers now too, home to herself. To the person she had been before the fire took everything the person her father had raised with ledgers and kitchen gardens, and the firm conviction that careful work meant something, and that the truth was always worth documenting. She had walked 3 weeks to find it. She thought it was fair to say she'd found more than she came looking for. Margaret Yates appeared at her elbow. "How does it feel?" she said. Emily thought about William's voice saying she stays, about the telegram on a Tuesday, about Fowler's second article, about the certified survey copy and Collins' own records used against him and the judge's ruling on a Saturday morning. "Like something my father would have written down," she said, very carefully, in permanent ink. Yates smiled. Across the yard, William was talking to Hart, and glanced over and found her eyes with the unhurried certainty of a man who knew where to look and was not worried about what he'd find. She looked back. He tipped his hat. Just slightly. The smallest possible gesture. The Western kind. Emily Carter. Emily Dawson now smiled. The woman who had walked into this county with nothing but a name nobody wanted, and a dead man's notes, and the refusal to let the world's verdict about her be the final one. She smiled in the Wyoming October sun, on the land that was hers, beside the life she had built from what she'd carried, and the open gate she'd had the courage to walk through, and it was enough. It was everything. It was, as her father had written on the first page of a ledger she still carried in her pocket, exactly what happened when you gave the land what it needed and trusted that the work meant something. Everything takes time and patience and faith, and the truth is always worth documenting.